The last thing Garrett Grace expected when she opened the general store that frost-laden morning in December 1876 was to see the mountain man she had loved and lost 5 years ago walking through the door of Silver Peak, Nevada, with a purpose in his stride that made her heart stutter in her chest. Vincent Jameson had changed in ways that stole her breath. His shoulders were broader than she remembered, muscles straining against the buckskin shirt he wore beneath a heavy fur coat that looked like it had been sewn from pelts he had trapped himself. His dark hair hung past his shoulders now, tied back with a leather cord, and his jaw was covered with a thick beard that somehow made his blue eyes even more striking. He carried himself with the quiet confidence of a man who had survived winters in the high mountains alone, who had faced down grizzlies and wolves and lived to tell the tale. Garrett's hands trembled as she set down the ledger she'd been pretending to study for the past hour. The numbers blurred together anyway, all of them painted in shades of red that represented debts she could not pay. Her father's gambling debts, her mother's medical bills before she passed, the loan on the store itself. The creditors were circling like vultures, and she knew it was only a matter of days before she lost everything. Vincent's gaze found hers across the room, and for a moment neither of them moved. The air between them crackled with all the words they had never said, all the promises that had been broken when he left to seek his fortune in the mountains, and she had stayed behind to care for her dying mother. "Garrett," he said, and his voice was deeper than she remembered, roughened by years of silence and solitude. Vincent," her voice came out barely above a whisper. "What are you doing here?" He crossed the room in 3 long strides, and she could smell the pine and wood smoke that clung to him, the wild scent of the high country. "I heard you were in trouble." She stiffened, pride flaring hot in her chest. "From who? Who told you that?" "Does it matter?" He pulled off his fur hat, turning it in his large, calloused hands. "Is it true?" Garrett wanted to lie, wanted to hold her head high and tell him she was fine, that she did not need anyone, especially not the man who had promised to come back for her and then disappeared into the wilderness for 5 years without so much as a letter. But the exhaustion of carrying this burden alone for so long overwhelmed her pride. Yes, she admitted, her voice breaking. "It's true. I owe more money than I can ever hope to pay back. The bank is threatening to foreclose on the store. Samuel Harding says he will forgive some of the debt if I agree to marry him, but I would rather lose everything than become his wife." Vincent's expression darkened at the mention of Samuel Harding. The banker's son had always had his eye on Garrett, even when she and Vincent had been courting years ago. "How much do you owe?" "Total?" "Vincent, I cannot ask you to—" "How much?" His voice was firm but not unkind. She swallowed hard. $873. Maybe more if you count the interest that keeps piling up. He nodded once as if she had just told him the weather forecast, then turned and walked back out the door without another word. Garrett stood frozen behind the counter, her heart hammering against her ribs. What had just happened? Had he come all this way just to confirm the gossip and then leave again? Tears burned behind her eyes, and she pressed her palms flat against the worn wooden counter to steady herself. But before she could sink into despair, the door opened again, and Vincent returned carrying heavy burlap sacks over each shoulder. He deposited them on the floor with a solid thump that rattled the jars on the shelves. "What is that?" Garrett asked. "A season's worth of pelts," Vincent said. "Beaver, marten, fox, and wolf. Best quality you will find anywhere in the territory." He straightened, rolling his shoulders. "I need to sell them. Who in town buys fur?" "Vincent, you cannot—" "Who buys fur, Garrett?" She stared at him. This man who had once been a lanky ranch hand with dreams bigger than Silver Peak could contain, now transformed into something harder and stronger, forged by the mountains, into someone who looked like he could carry the weight of the world on those broad shoulders. "Thomas Mercer," she finally said. "He runs the trading post on 2nd Street, but Vincent—" He was already gathering up the sacks again. "Come with me. I have the store to mind. Lock it up. This is more important." Something in his tone made her reach for her shawl without further argument. She locked the door and fell into step beside him, having to hurry to match his long stride. The morning sun was just beginning to burn off the frost that coated the buildings of Silver Peak, turning everything silver and gold. Her breath puffed white in the cold December air. "You do not have to do this," she said quietly as they walked. "Whatever happened between us, Whatever I might have meant to you once, you do not owe me anything." Vincent stopped so abruptly she almost ran into him. He set the sacks down and turned to face her, reaching out to cup her face with one rough hand. His palm was warm against her cold cheek. "You think I came here out of obligation?" His thumb brushed over her cheekbone, and she shivered. "Garrett, I spent 5 years in those mountains thinking about you every single day. I left because I had nothing to offer you. I was a ranch hand making $20 a month. You deserved better than that. You deserved a man who could give you a real life." "I never cared about money," she whispered. "I know, but I did. I cared about being able to provide for you, protect you. So I went into the mountains to make something of myself. I trapped through winters that would have killed most men. I learned to track and hunt and survive on nothing but what I could carry on my back. And every pelt I took, every sunrise I watched over some frozen valley, I thought about the day I would come back and be the man you deserved." Tears spilled down her cheeks now. "You were always the man I wanted, Vincent. Always." He leaned down and pressed his forehead against hers. "Then let me do this. Let me take care of you the way I should have done 5 years ago." She nodded, not trusting her voice, and he picked up the sacks again. They continued to the trading post in silence, but it was a different kind of silence now, weighted with promise instead of regret. Thomas Mercer was a grizzled old trader who had been buying furs in Silver Peak since before Garrett was born. He looked up from his pipe when they entered, his eyes widening when he saw the sacks Vincent carried. "Well, I will be damned," Thomas said, standing up from his stool. "Vincent Jameson, heard you had gone native up in the high country." "Still civilized enough to do business," Vincent replied with a slight smile. He set the sacks on the counter and began pulling out pelts one by one. Garrett watched as Thomas examined each fur with an expert eye, running his fingers through the thick beaver pelts, holding the marten skins up to the light. His expression grew more impressed with each piece Vincent laid out. "These are prime," Thomas said, his voice carrying a note of respect. "Some of the best quality I've seen in years. Where did you trap these?" "Up near the Ruby Mountains," Vincent said. "Found some valleys where the beaver are still thick." Thomas nodded, continuing his examination. When all the pelts were laid out, he pulled out his spectacles and began making calculations in a worn ledger. The scratch of his pencil seemed impossibly loud in the quiet trading post. Finally, he looked up. "I can give you $940 for the lot. And that is a fair price, son. You could take these to Carson City and maybe get a bit more, but not much." Vincent glanced at Garrett. "Sounds fair to me." "You want cash or credit?" "Cash. All of it." Thomas went to his safe and began counting out bills and coins. Garrett felt dizzy watching the money pile up on the counter. $940, more than enough to pay off all her debts with some left over. Vincent had just traded away months of brutal work, risking his life in the wilderness for her. When Thomas handed over the money, Vincent counted it carefully, then turned to Garrett. "Which debts need to be paid first?" "The bank," she said, her voice shaking. "They are the ones threatening foreclosure." "Then we go to the bank." Silver Peaks Bank was a sturdy brick building on Main Street, designed to look more impressive than the town probably deserved. Samuel Harding was behind the counter when they walked in, his slicked back hair and expensive suit marking him as someone who considered himself above the dusty miners and ranchers who made up most of Silver Peak's population. His expression soured when he saw Vincent beside Garrett. "Miss Grace," he said, deliberately not acknowledging Vincent, "have you reconsidered my offer?" "She does not need your offer," Vincent said, stepping forward. "How much does she owe the bank?" Samuel's eyes narrowed. "That is between the bank and Miss Grace." "It is $422, Garrett said quietly, "for the loan on the store and the interest." Vincent counted out the money and laid it on the counter. "There, paid in full. I want a receipt stating the debt is cleared and the store belongs to Miss Grace, free and clear." Samuel stared at the money as if it were a snake that might bite him. "Where did a mountain man get this kind of cash?" "Does it matter? The debt is paid. Write the receipt." For a moment, Garrett thought Samuel might refuse, but he finally pulled out the bank's official stationery and began writing in his careful, cramped handwriting. When he slid the receipt across the counter, Vincent read it carefully before folding it and handing it to Garrett. "You are making a mistake," Samuel said to Garrett, his voice low and bitter. "A woman like you needs stability, a future, not some wild man who will disappear back into the mountains the first time winter breaks." Vincent leaned across the counter, and Samuel actually took a step back. "You should worry less about Miss Grace's future and more about your manners. She does not belong to you, and she never will." They left the bank with Samuel glaring after them, and Garrett felt lighter than she had in months. One debt down. But there were still others. "Where next?" Vincent asked. Over the next 3 hours, they walked all over Silver Peak. They paid off the doctor who had cared for Garrett's mother in her final illness. They settled her account at the mercantile where she bought goods to stock her own store. They paid the dressmaker who had extended Garrett credit when she needed mourning clothes. They even tracked down the men her father had owed gambling debts to before he died, handing over cash to surprised cowboys and miners who had long since written off those losses. By the time the sun was high overhead, Garrett's debts were completely paid, with nearly $100 left over. Vincent insisted she keep that money for herself, for the store, for whatever she might need. They walked back to the general store together, and Garrett unlocked the door with fingers that still trembled slightly. Inside, she turned to face him, this man who had just changed her entire life in the course of a single morning. "I do not know what to say," she began. "Then do not say anything yet," Vincent replied. He took off his heavy fur coat and hung it on the hook by the door, revealing the buckskin shirt underneath that showed off the powerful muscles of his arms and chest. "I came to Silver Peak to do more than pay your debts, Garrett. I came to ask you if you could forgive me for leaving, if you could give me another chance." Her heart swelled. "Vincent, there is nothing to forgive. You did what you thought was right. I should have stayed. I should have found a way to make it work here instead of running off to prove something to myself. But if you had stayed, you would not be the man standing in front of me now," Garrett said, moving closer to him. "You would have always wondered if you could have made it in the mountains. You would have resented being tied down. What you did, what you became, it was necessary. I see that now." He reached out and pulled her into his arms, and she went willingly, pressing her face against his broad chest and breathing in that scent of pine and wilderness that clung to him. His heart beat strong and steady beneath her ear. "I love you," he said into her hair. "I never stopped loving you, not for one single day in those 5 years." "I love you too," she whispered. "I've been waiting for you to come home." He tilted her chin up and kissed her, and it was like coming home after a long, cold journey. His lips were warm and sure, and she melted into him, her hands coming up to tangle in his long hair. The kiss deepened, 5 years of longing and loneliness pouring into it, until they finally broke apart, both breathing hard. "Maniti." "Marry me," Vincent said. "Not because I paid your debts, not because you feel obligated. Marry me because you want to spend your life with me, because I want to wake up next to you every morning and fall asleep holding you every night, because I want to build a life here with you, a real life." "Yes," Garrett said, laughing and crying at the same time. "Yes, Vincent, I will marry you." He picked her up and spun her around, and she shrieked with laughter, her hands on his massive shoulders. When he set her down, they were both grinning like fools. "When?" she asked. "As soon as possible. Tomorrow, if we can arrange it." "Tomorrow?" Garrett blinked. "Vincent, I need to make arrangements. I need a dress. You need to be my wife," he said firmly. "Everything else is just decoration. Say yes to tomorrow." She looked into his blue eyes, so full of love and certainty, and felt her own certainty rise to meet his. What did she need time for? She had already waited 5 years. "Yes," she said, "tomorrow." The rest of that day passed in a blur. Garrett closed the store early, and together she and Vincent went to speak with Reverend Walsh, the circuit preacher who happened to be in Silver Peak for the week. The elderly reverend was delighted to perform the ceremony and agreed to meet them at the small church at 10 o'clock the following morning. That evening, Garrett invited Vincent to have dinner with her in the small apartment above the general store where she lived. She cooked a simple meal of bacon and beans and cornbread, watching in amazement as Vincent ate with the appetite of a man who had spent years cooking over campfires and going hungry between successful hunts. "This is the best meal I have had in 5 years," he said, sopping up bean juice with his cornbread. Garrett laughed. "It is just bacon and beans. It is a meal cooked by the woman I love, in a warm house, sitting at a real table. That makes it the best meal in the world." After dinner, they sat together on the small sofa, talking late into the night. Vincent told her about his years in the mountains, about the brutal winters and the dangerous wildlife, about the quiet beauty of watching the sunrise over snow-covered peaks. He told her about the other trappers he had met, the various characters who made their living in the high country. Garrett told him about running the store after her father died, about nursing her mother through her final illness, about the slow accumulation of debts that had threatened to crush her. She told him about Samuel Harding's increasingly aggressive attempts to court her, about the fear that had kept her awake at night as she watched everything her family had built slip through her fingers. "You do not have to be afraid anymore," Vincent said, pulling her close against his side. "I am here now. I'm not going anywhere." "Promise me," she whispered. "Promise me you will not get restless and need to go back to the mountains." He was quiet for a moment, and she appreciated that he was thinking about his answer rather than just telling her what she wanted to hear. "I will not lie and say I will never miss it," he finally said. "The mountains get into your blood, but missing something and needing it are different things. What I need is here. You are here. This is where I want to build my life." "What will you do? For work, I mean." "I thought I might invest what is left of my money in your store. Become your partner. And I can still trap and hunt, but locally. Take trips out to the Ruby Mountains for a week or two at a time, bring back furs to sell. But I will always come back to you. Always." "I would like that," Garrett said. "Having you as my partner, in the store and in life." When the hour grew late, Vincent reluctantly stood to leave. "I should find a room at the boarding house," he said. Garrett stood too, catching his hand. "Or you could stay here, with me." His eyes darkened. "Garrett, we are not married yet. We will be tomorrow. And I have already waited 5 years for you, Vincent. I do not want to spend another night alone if I do not have to." He cupped her face in both his large hands, searching her eyes. "Are you sure?" "I have never been more sure of anything in my life." He kissed her then, deeply and thoroughly, and she led him to her small bedroom. They undressed each other slowly, learning the changes 5 years had wrought on their bodies. Garrett traced the scars on his chest and arms, mementos of his time in the wilderness. Vincent worshipped her body with his hands and mouth, murmuring how beautiful she was, how he had dreamed of this moment through countless cold and lonely nights. When they finally came together, it was with a sense of rightness that made Garrett's eyes sting with tears. This was what she had been missing, what she had been incomplete without, not just the physical pleasure, though that was overwhelming, but the intimacy of being truly known by another person, of being cherished and held and loved. Afterward, they lay tangled together in her narrow bed, and Vincent held her close as she drifted off to sleep. She had never felt so safe, so protected, so completely at peace. The next morning dawned clear and cold. Garrett woke wrapped in Vincent's arms, his steady breathing warm against her neck. For a moment she just lay there, savoring the feeling of being held by him, before the reality of the day ahead made her sit up. "We are getting married today," she said aloud, as if testing the words. Vincent's arms tightened around her, pulling her back down. "We are," he agreed, nuzzling into her hair. "Having second thoughts?" "Not even for a moment, but I do need to get ready, and you need to get ready. And we should probably arrive at the church separately so the Reverend does not know you spent the night here." He laughed, a deep rumbling sound she felt through his chest. "I suppose you are right, though I do not much care what anyone thinks." "Well, I care about maintaining some sense of propriety," Garrett said, though she was smiling. "Now let me up so I can make us breakfast." They ate together. Then Vincent headed to the boarding house to clean up and change into the new clothes he had purchased the day before at the Mercantile. Garrett spent the morning preparing herself, washing her hair and putting on her best dress, a dark green wool that brought out her eyes. She had no veil, no fancy wedding gown, but when she looked at herself in the small mirror, she saw a woman who was glowing with happiness, and that was worth more than any amount of lace or silk. She arrived at the church at 9:45 to find several townspeople already gathered. Word had spread that Vincent Jameson had returned and that he and Garrett Grace were to be married, and it seemed half the town wanted to witness it. She saw the baker and his wife, the blacksmith, several of the ranchers' families who regularly shopped at her store. Even Thomas Mercer was there, cleaned up and wearing what looked like his Sunday best. Vincent was waiting at the front of the church, and Garrett's breath caught when she saw him. He had trimmed his beard and braided his long hair back from his face. He wore new black trousers and a white shirt that strained across his broad shoulders, with a dark vest that made his eyes look impossibly blue. He looked like something out of a dream, this powerful, rugged man who was about to become her husband. Reverend Walsh began the ceremony, speaking the familiar words about love and commitment and the sacred bond of marriage. Garrett barely heard them, too focused on Vincent's face, on the way he was looking at her as if she were the only person in the world. When it came time for the vows, Vincent took her hands in his. His voice was strong and clear as he promised to love her, honor her, cherish her for all the days of his life. Garrett made the same promises, her voice wavering with emotion but full of certainty. "I now pronounce you man and wife," Reverend Walsh said with a broad smile. "You may kiss your bride." Vincent pulled Garrett into his arms and kissed her as the small congregation erupted in applause and cheers. She felt his smile against her lips and could not help but smile too, her heart so full she thought it might burst. They walked back down the aisle together, husband and wife, and were immediately surrounded by well-wishers. The baker's wife had made a cake as a surprise gift, and someone else had brought a fiddle, and before Garrett quite knew what was happening, an impromptu celebration had broken out in the churchyard. She danced with Vincent in the cold December sunshine, his strong arms guiding her through steps she had almost forgotten. Other couples joined them, and the sound of laughter and music filled the air. It was simple and spontaneous and absolutely perfect. As the afternoon wore on and people began to drift away, back to their own lives and responsibilities, Samuel Harding appeared at the edge of the churchyard. He stood watching them for a long moment, his expression unreadable, before turning and walking away without a word. "Do you think he will make trouble?" Garrett asked quietly, watching him go. Vincent shook his head. "No, he's a banker's son, not a fighter, and he knows if he tries anything, he will have to answer to me." There was no arrogance in the statement, just simple fact. Vincent was not the kind of man who went looking for trouble, but Garrett had no doubt he could handle himself if trouble found him. They spent the rest of the day cleaning up the general store and making plans for their future. Vincent had ideas about expanding the store's inventory, about bringing in furs and other goods from his contacts in the mountains. Garrett found herself energized by his enthusiasm, by the sense that they were building something together. That night, they made love again in Garrett's bed, though now it was their bed, their home, their life. Garrett traced the contours of Vincent's muscular chest, marveling at the solid strength of him, at the gentleness with which such a powerful man could touch her. "I cannot believe you are really here," she whispered in the darkness. "Sometimes I am afraid I will wake up and find this was all a dream." "It is real," Vincent assured her, pulling her close. "I am real. This is real, and I am never leaving you again." The days that followed settled into a comfortable rhythm. Vincent proved to be a natural businessman, with an easy way with customers and a good head for numbers. Together, they reorganized the store, bringing in new inventory and creating a section specifically for mountain goods furs, pelts, trapping supplies, and equipment for prospectors and hunters heading into the high country. Word spread that Vincent Jameson knew the Ruby Mountains better than almost anyone, and soon men were coming to the store not just to buy supplies, but to ask his advice about the best places to trap, the safest routes through the mountains, which valleys had the most game. Vincent was always generous with his knowledge, and his reputation brought in steady business. As winter deepened, the occasional snowfall dusting Silver Peak with white, Garrett found herself happier than she had ever been. She loved working alongside Vincent, loved the way he would catch her eye across the store and smile, loved falling asleep in his arms every night and waking up beside him every morning. In late January, nearly 2 months after their wedding, Garrett began to feel unwell. She tried to hide it from Vincent at first, not wanting him to worry, but he noticed everything. "You barely touched your breakfast," he said one morning, concern evident in his voice. "Are you feeling all right?" "I'm fine," Garrett insisted, though in truth she felt distinctly queasy. "Just a bit tired." But when the same thing happened the next morning, and the morning after that, Vincent insisted she see the doctor. Garrett protested that it was unnecessary, that she was probably just run down from the busy season at the store. But Vincent was immovable. "Please," he said, taking her hands, "for my peace of mind, let Dr. Morrison examine you." So she went, and when Dr. Morrison confirmed what she had already begun to suspect in the back of her mind, she walked out of his office in a daze. Vincent was waiting for her on the street, pacing like a caged mountain lion. He stopped when he saw her face. "What is it? What did he say? Are you sick?" "No," Garrett said, a smile breaking across her face. "I am not sick. I am pregnant, Vincent. We are going to have a baby." For a moment he just stared at her, and then he let out a whoop of joy that made people all up and down the street turn to look. He picked her up and spun her around, laughing, and she laughed too, dizzy with happiness and relief. "A baby," he kept repeating. "We are going to have a baby." "Are you happy?" Garrett asked, though she could see the answer written all over his face. "Happy? Garrett, I'm beyond happy. I am—" He set her down carefully, as if she were made of glass. "I'm going to be a father. We are going to be parents." The pregnancy was not easy. Garrett was sick most mornings for the first few months, and Vincent fussed over her constantly, insisting she rest more, that she not lift heavy things, that she let him handle the more strenuous tasks around the store. She found his protectiveness both endearing and occasionally frustrating, but she could not deny it felt good to be so cherished. As her belly grew and spring came to Silver Peak, bringing wildflowers and warm sunshine, they began preparing for the baby's arrival. Vincent built a beautiful wooden cradle with his own hands, carving delicate designs into the headboard. Garrett sewed tiny clothes and blankets, amazed that a person could be so small. They talked for hours about names, about what kind of parents they wanted to be, about the life they would build for their child. Vincent admitted he was nervous about being a father, that he had never had a good example in his own Pio, who had been a hard, distant man. "You will be a wonderful father," Garrett assured him. "You are kind and patient and loving. Our child will be so lucky to have you." "I just want to give them a better childhood than I had," Vincent said quietly. "I want them to feel safe and loved and know they can be anything they want to be." "They will," Garrett promised. "We will make sure of it together." In August, as the summer heat baked Silver Peak and made Garrett's swollen feet ache, their son was born. The labor was long and difficult, and there were moments when Garrett thought she could not endure another minute. But Vincent was there the whole time, holding her hand, wiping her forehead with a cool cloth, murmuring encouragement. When the baby finally arrived, wailing and red-faced and absolutely perfect, Vincent cut the umbilical cord with shaking hands. Dr. Morrison cleaned the baby and wrapped him in a soft blanket, then handed him to Garrett. She looked down at her son, at his tiny, scrunched-up face and his shock of dark hair, and felt her heart expand in ways she had not known were possible. "Hello, little one," she whispered. Vincent sat beside her on the bed, his arm around her shoulders, looking down at their son with wonder in his eyes. "He is beautiful, perfect, just like his mama." They named him Thomas after Garrett's father, with the middle name Vincent. Little Tommy was a good baby, though he had his father's powerful lungs and made sure everyone in Silver Peak knew when he was hungry or needed changing. Vincent took to fatherhood with a fierce tenderness that made Garrett fall in love with him all over again. She would often find him in the middle of the night, sitting in the rocking chair by the window with Tommy in his arms, singing old mountain songs in his deep voice. He changed diapers without complaint, walked the floor with the baby when he was fussy, and looked at his son with such pure love that it made Garrett's chest ache. The store continued to thrive with Vincent managing things while Garrett recovered and then adjusted to life with a newborn. He hired a young woman named Sarah to help with the counter during busy times, which freed up both him and Garrett to spend more time with Tommy. As Tommy grew from an infant into a toddler, his personality emerged. He was curious and adventurous, already trying to climb before he could walk properly. He had Vincent's blue eyes and Garrett's smile, and he was the joy of their lives. On Tommy's second birthday, as they celebrated with a small party attended by friends and neighbors, Garrett found a quiet moment alone with Vincent in the kitchen. "Are you happy?" she asked, the same question she had asked him when she told him she was pregnant. "More than I ever thought possible," Vincent said, pulling her into his arms. Sometimes I think about where I was 3 years ago, alone in those mountains, convinced I was doing the right thing by staying away from you. And then I think about what my life is now. You, Tommy, the store, this community. I have everything I ever wanted, Garrett, everything that matters. I am glad you came back, she said softly. I am glad you walked into town that day and paid off my debts, not because of the money, but because it brought you back to me. Best decision I ever made, Vincent said, and kissed her. Life in Silver Peak settled into a comfortable pattern over the next few years. The general store became one of the most successful businesses in town, known for fair prices and quality goods. Vincent's reputation as a tracker and mountain guide brought in additional income, and he would occasionally take groups of hunters or prospectors into the Ruby Mountains, though he never stayed away for more than a week at a time. True to his word, he always came back to Garrett and Tommy. When Tommy was 4, Garrett became pregnant again. This time the pregnancy was easier, though she was older now and tired more easily. Vincent was even more protective this time around, if that was possible, and Tommy took his role as big brother very seriously, talking to Garrett's belly and bringing her things he thought the baby might need. Their daughter was born in the spring during a rainstorm that washed Silver Peak clean and left everything smelling of sage and wet earth. She came into the world more quietly than her brother had, with wide eyes that seemed to take everything in. They named her Margaret, after Garrett's mother, but from the start everyone called her Maggie. Tommy was enchanted with his baby sister, constantly wanting to hold her and help take care of her. Vincent would sit with both children, Tommy on one knee and Maggie cradled in his arm, telling them stories about the mountains and the wild animals he had seen. As the children grew, so did the family business. They expanded the store, adding a second room for additional inventory. Vincent began buying furs not just from local trappers, but from other mountain men throughout the territory, and their reputation for fair dealing spread. Samuel Harding eventually married a woman from Carson City and seemed to let go of his bitterness toward Garrett. He and Vincent maintained a cordial, if not friendly, relationship, doing business when necessary but keeping their distance otherwise. Silver Peak itself was growing and changing. The railroad was coming closer, and talk of Nevada gaining statehood was in the air. New families moved to town, new businesses opened. The Wild West was slowly being tamed, but there was still a frontier spirit in Silver Peak, a sense that anything was possible for those willing to work hard enough. Through it all, Vincent and Garrett's love only deepened. They had weathered separation and hardship, debt and uncertainty, and come through stronger for it. On quiet evenings, after the children were asleep and the store was closed, they would sit together on the porch Vincent had built onto their home above the store, looking out at the stars. "Do you ever miss it?" Garrett asked one such evening when Tommy was 7 and Maggie was 3. "The mountains, the solitude, the freedom of that life." Vincent considered the question, as he always did when she asked. "Sometimes," he admitted. "There is a purity to that life, a simplicity. It is just you and the wilderness, surviving by your wits and skills. But I do not miss being alone, Garrett. I do not miss waking up in an empty camp or sitting by a fire with no one to talk to. I have freedom here too, just a different kind. The freedom to love you, the freedom to watch our children grow, the freedom to build something that lasts." "That's a good answer," Garrett said, leaning her head on his shoulder. "It is the truth," Vincent replied, kissing the top of her head. When Tommy was old enough, Vincent began taking him on short trips into the foothills, teaching him to track and hunt and survive in the wilderness. Garrett watched them go with a mixture of pride and worry, but she knew it was important for Tommy to learn these skills, to understand where his father had come from and what he had endured. Tommy took to it naturally, and Vincent was a patient, thorough teacher. They would come back from these trips sunburned and happy, full of stories about the deer they had tracked or the eagle they had seen. Maggie, meanwhile, showed more interest in the store, in numbers and inventory and the art of negotiation. By the time she was 5, she could count money and make change, and customers were charmed by the little girl who would seriously discuss the merits of different types of flour or the quality of various bolts of cloth. "She is going to be running this place by the time she is 10, Vincent said one day, watching Maggie carefully arrange canned goods on a shelf. She gets her head for business from you, Garrett said. And her charm from you, Vincent countered. The years passed in a blur of school plays and birthday parties, of teaching the children to read and write, of Sunday dinners and Christmas celebrations. Vincent's hair began to show threads of silver, and Garrett found laugh lines forming around her eyes, but they were both healthy and happy and grateful for the life they had built. When Tommy was 12 and Maggie was 8, Garrett discovered she was pregnant again. She was shocked. She had thought she was finished having children, but Vincent was thrilled. "One more blessing," he said, his hand on her still flat stomach. "One more piece of our hearts walking around outside our bodies." This pregnancy was harder than the previous two, and there were times when Garrett worried about both her own health and the baby's. But Vincent was there every step of the way, supporting her, encouraging her, taking on more of the work around the store and the house. Their second son was born in late winter, during a blizzard that trapped everyone in Silver Peak indoors for 3 days. He was a big baby, strong and healthy, with a full head of dark hair and lungs that could rattle the windows. They named him Henry, and from the start he was all personality, demanding attention and affection in equal measure. Tommy and Maggie adored their baby brother, though Tommy sometimes complained about the crying, and Maggie was forever trying to mother him. Vincent juggled all 3 children with ease, somehow managing to give each of them individual attention while also running the store and maintaining his various business interests. "How do you do it?" Garrett asked one evening, watching him play on the floor with all 3 children at once. Henry was trying to grab his father's beard, Maggie was showing Vincent a drawing she had made, and Tommy was explaining a complicated plan for a treehouse. Do what?" Vincent looked up. Henry clutched against his broad chest. "Be everything to everyone. Be such a good father, such a good husband, run the business and never seem overwhelmed." He grinned. "I learned to survive alone in the wilderness with nothing but what I could carry. This is easy by comparison. Besides, I have you. We are a team, remember?" As Henry grew from baby to toddler to little boy, the family dynamic shifted again. Tommy was becoming a young man, starting to think about his future. He talked about maybe becoming a guide like his father, about exploring the territories to the north, about adventure and possibility. Maggie wanted to expand the store, to start carrying women's fashions and fancy goods that would appeal to the wealthier families, starting to settle in Silver Peak. She had a natural instinct for business that impressed even Vincent. Henry, true to his nature, wanted to be involved in everything. He followed Tommy around when Tommy let him, helped Maggie with her schemes, and shadowed Vincent whenever possible, trying to walk like him and talk like him. "That boy is going to be a handful," Vincent said one day, watching 7-year-old Henry try to lift a barrel that was twice his size. "He is just like his father," Garrett said with a smile, "stubborn and strong and determined to do everything himself." "Fair enough," Vincent conceded. When Tommy turned 18, the same age Garrett had been when Vincent first left for the mountains all those years ago, he announced his intention to spend a season trapping in the Ruby Mountains himself. Garrett's first instinct was to say no, to keep her son safe at home, but Vincent laid a gentle hand on her arm. "Let him go," he said quietly. "He needs to test himself, to see what he is made of. I will go with him for the first month, make sure he is set up properly, teach him everything he needs to know, but then I will come back, and he will have to prove he can make it on his own." It was one of the hardest things Garrett ever did, watching Tommy and Vincent ride out of Silver Peak that September morning with pack horses loaded with supplies. But she knew Vincent was right. Tommy needed this. Vincent kept his promise, returning after a month with reports that Tommy was doing well, that he had learned quickly and was already successful in his trapping. But the house felt empty without Tommy's energy and laughter, and Garrett counted the days until spring when he would return. When Tommy finally rode back into Silver Peak in late April, he was transformed. He was leaner, harder, with a new confidence in his bearing. He looked, Garrett realized, like a younger version of his father. The reunion was joyful and loud, with Maggie and Henry both talking over each other in their excitement. Tommy had brought gifts for everyone. Furs for his mother, a carved knife for his father, a fox pelt for Maggie, and a collection of interesting rocks and feathers for Henry. That night, over dinner, Tommy regaled them with stories of his winter in the mountains. He had faced down a mountain lion, survived a blizzard that lasted 3 days, and learned to live off the land the way his father had taught him. "But I missed you all," he said, looking around the table. "I missed this, being part of a family. I understand now why Pa came back, why he chose this life over that one." Vincent reached over and clasped his son's shoulder, pride evident in his eyes. "You did well, son, but I'm glad to have you home." Tommy decided to stay in Silver Peak, working with Vincent to expand the fur trading side of the business. Together, they built relationships with trappers throughout the territory, and the general store became known as the best place to sell quality furs. Maggie, meanwhile, convinced her parents to let her open a small millinery and dress shop adjacent to the general store. She had a talent for fashion and an eye for what women wanted, and the shop became popular with the growing number of middle-class families in Silver Peak. Henry, at 10 years old, declared he was going to be a sheriff when he grew up, so he could protect people like his pa protected the family. He practiced his quick draw with a stick and followed Silver Peak's actual sheriff around, until the man good-naturedly deputized him as an honorary junior lawman. Garrett watched her children flourish and felt deeply grateful for the life she and Vincent had built. The debts that had once threatened to destroy her were a distant memory now. The fear and uncertainty of those years before Vincent returned had been replaced by security and joy. On their 20th wedding anniversary, Vincent took Garrett on a trip into the mountains, leaving the children in Tommy's capable care. They rode up into the Ruby Mountains, to a meadow Vincent had discovered years ago during his trapping days. It was beautiful beyond words, a valley surrounded by snow-capped peaks, with a crystal-clear stream running through it and wildflowers carpeting the ground in every color imaginable. They made camp and spent 3 days there, just the two of them, talking and making love and remembering their journey together. "I planned to bring you here from the first," Vincent admitted as they sat by the fire one evening. "Even when I was up here alone, I would think about bringing you to this meadow, showing you the beauty I found in these mountains." "It is perfect," Garrett said, snuggled against his side. "Thank you for sharing it with me." "Thank you for taking a chance on a broken-down mountain man who walked into your store one December morning," Vincent replied. "You were never broken," Garrett said firmly. "You were exactly what you needed to be, and you became exactly who I needed you to be." They returned to Silver Peak renewed and refreshed, ready to dive back into the busy life of family and business. The years continued to pass, marked by holidays and milestones, challenges and triumphs. Tommy eventually married a schoolteacher who moved to Silver Peak from San Francisco, a smart, practical woman named Elizabeth. They had 3 children of their own, making Vincent and Garrett grandparents and delighting in the role. Maggie married at 25, choosing a banker from Carson City who was nothing like Samuel Harding kind and supportive of her business ambitions. They split their time between Carson City and Silver Peak, and Maggie eventually opened a second shop in the capital. Henry did become a lawman, though not in Silver Peak. He joined the Territorial Marshal Service and made a name for himself tracking outlaws through the wilderness, using the skills his father and brother had taught him. Through all of it, Vincent and Garrett remained the center around which the family orbited. The store continued to operate, though they gradually turned over more responsibility to managers as they aged. They spent more time with their grandchildren, spoiling them in the way grandparents do, telling them stories about the old days, and teaching them the values of hard work and integrity. On their 30th anniversary, the whole family gathered in Silver Peak for a celebration. All 3 of their children were there with their spouses, and children, 9 grandchildren in total, ranging from baby to teenager. The house was full of noise and laughter and love. Garrett looked around at the chaos and felt her heart overflow. This was what Vincent had given her when he walked into town that cold December morning so many years ago. Not just freedom from debt, though that had been important. Not just financial security, though that had been a blessing. He had given her a family, a legacy, a life full of love and meaning and joy. That evening, after everyone had gone to bed and the house was finally quiet, Vincent and Garrett sat on their porch as they had done countless times before. Vincent's hair was fully silver now, and there were deep lines around his eyes, but he was still strong and solid, still the man who could make her heart race with just a look. "Do you have any regrets?" Garrett asked, a question she had never posed before. Vincent thought about it seriously. "I regret the 5 years we lost," he finally said. I regret that I was not there when your mother died, that you had to go through that alone. I regret I let my pride and my ambition keep me away from the woman I loved. But everything else? No regrets. Those years in the mountains made me who I am. They taught me what really matters, and they led me back to you. I have no regrets either, Garrett said. Every choice, every hardship, every moment of pain or fear, it all led to this, to us, to this life. I would not change a single thing. Not even the debts? Vincent asked with a slight smile. Garrett laughed. Well, maybe I would have preferred not to owe $800. But if those debts were what brought you back to me, then I am grateful for them too. They sat in comfortable silence, holding hands and watching the stars emerge in the darkening sky. Somewhere in the house, a grandchild laughed in their sleep, a dog barked in the distance. The familiar sounds of Silver Peak settling in for the night surrounded them. I love you, Vincent said quietly. I have loved you from the moment I first saw you, all those years ago, and I will love you until my last breath and beyond. I love you too, Garrett whispered, my mountain man, my hero, my home. The years that followed were gentler, slower. Vincent and Garrett gradually retired from active management of the store, though they still spent time there most days, greeting old customers and friends. They traveled a bit, visiting Maggie in Carson City and Henry wherever his work took him. But they always came back to Silver Peak, to the home they had built together. When Vincent was 72 and Garrett was 70, they took one last trip up to the meadow in the Ruby Mountains. It was harder now, their bodies not as strong as they once were. But Vincent was determined, and Garrett would not let him go without her. They spent a week there, moving slowly and carefully, savoring every moment. They talked about their life together, about all the memories they had made, about the children and grandchildren they were so proud of. I am ready, Vincent said one evening, and Garrett knew he was not talking about being ready to go back to Silver Peak. Not yet, she said firmly, taking his hand. We still have time. We still have years. And they did. 3 more years of quiet contentment, of watching grandchildren grow and great-grandchildren arrive. 3 more years of sitting on their porch and holding hands, of making love with the tenderness of long practice, of simply being together. Vincent died peacefully in his sleep on a warm summer night, with Garrett beside him. One moment he was breathing steadily, holding her hand, and the next he was gone, slipped away as quietly as he had moved through the mountains in his youth. Garrett held him and cried, her heart breaking even as she was grateful he had not suffered, that he had lived a long and full and happy life. The family gathered for the funeral, and half of Silver Peak turned out to say goodbye to the mountain man who had become such an integral part of their community. They buried him in the Silver Peak Cemetery, under a simple headstone that read, Vincent Jameson, beloved husband, father, and friend. He found his way home. Garrett lived for 3 more years without him, surrounded by the love of her children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren. But everyone could see that part of her had gone with Vincent. She spoke of him often, always with a smile, and she wore his old buckskin shirt sometimes, breathing in the scent that still lingered in the fabric. On a crisp autumn morning, just as the aspens were turning gold in the mountains, Garrett passed away quietly in her sleep. Her family found her with a peaceful expression on her face, and one of Vincent's old letters clutched in her hand, a letter he had written to her during his years in the mountains but never sent, one she had found among his things after he died. They buried her beside Vincent, and the whole town mourned the loss of a woman who had been a pillar of their community for over 50 years. The store passed to Tommy and his children, and Maggie's shops continued to thrive. Henry eventually retired from the marshal service and settled in Silver Peak, wanting to be close to his roots. The story of Vincent and Garrett became part of Silver Peak's history, the tale of the mountain man who walked into town one winter day and paid off every debt owed by the woman he loved, then stayed to build a life and a legacy that lasted generations. Their great-grandchildren and great-great-grandchildren grew up hearing the story, learning about the power of love and commitment, about the importance of keeping your promises, about how one act of selfless devotion could change not just 2 lives, but an entire family's destiny. The general store still stood on Main Street, run now by the 5th generation of Vincent and Garrett's descendants. Inside, hanging on the wall behind the counter, was a framed collection of beaver pelts, the last ones Vincent had trapped before he came back to Silver Peak, and beside them, the receipt showing Garrett's debts marked "Paid in Full." Below the frame was a small plaque that read, "Love finds a way." And in Silver Peak, Nevada, where the mountains met the desert and dreams were built on hope and hard work, the story of Vincent and Garrett lived on, a reminder that the greatest treasures were not found in mountain streams or hidden veins of silver, but in the hearts of the people we love and the families we build together. Their love story had begun with a sacrifice, Vincent trading a season's worth of pelts to free Garrett from debt. But it had grown into something far greater, a lifetime of partnership, a family that spanned generations, and a legacy of love that would endure long after both of them had returned to the earth. That was the true treasure Vincent had found in those mountains all those years ago, not the pelts he had trapped, but the understanding that the only wealth that really mattered was the kind you could not spend, the kind you built through devotion and sacrifice, and the daily choice to love someone with your whole heart. He had walked into Silver Peak with bags of fur over his shoulders and walked out with everything he had ever truly wanted. And Garrett, who had been drowning in debt and despair, had found herself rescued not just financially but spiritually, given a second chance at happiness by the one man who had never stopped loving her. Together they had built something that lasted, something that mattered, something that proved that love, real, committed, sacrificial love, could overcome any obstacle and create beauty in even the harshest wilderness.